Hello everybody. I want to talk about grind in games, and I think there are not multiple definitions of grind. I think people can use the word grind to describe different things, but the way that grind is usually described is where you do something in the game that isn't part of the main quest, the main thing that you're doing, that's generally quite easy, and you're doing it in order to be able to accumulate rewards. And this thing is optional. It's a side thing. You don't have to do it, but you do it to basically rack up points so that you can then breeze through the rest of the game, or at least make the rest of the game easier, or make other parts of the game easier. However, when a game is described as being grindy, what they usually mean is it's a game where you have to do some grinding. And I think this kind of defies the idea, or kind of goes against the idea of what grind is if you have to do it, if we are strictly going to use that definition. Because let's take Dragon Quest 1 for example, the original Dragon Warrior as it was called in the United States. In that game, you have to kill lots of enemies in order to be able to progress. Why? Because you'll need the experience and the money in order to be able to get the levels and equipment, in order to be able to even stand a chance against the later things in the game. So when you start, you go to the first town, buy equipment, or don't, or save your money, and you literally walk around in circles fighting the same enemies. Maybe like 2 or 3 enemies that you fight. And what I find quite strange is that at that point, it doesn't become an optional side thing. Sure, you're doing it to build up the points and build up the levels, but if you have to do it, then it's not really about the levels. It's more of just a thing you have to do, and you will naturally have more levels and more gold and stuff later on in the game because you've done this thing. But because you have to do the thing, because you must grind in order to be able to progress in this game, you must fight these enemies over and over again. Does that part of the game not count as progressing? If you started Dragon Warrior, or Dragon Quest, whatever you want to call it, if you started that game at level 30, which is the max level, the game would be completely different. Grinding isn't a side thing, it's an act that you have to do. And if you were to start straight away at level 30 with the max stats you can get, it kind of feels like you're missing out on what the game's about. Whether you want to say you're missing a good thing or a bad thing is entirely up to you, but the point is that you are missing out a core part of what makes that game what it is. The game becomes completely different because no longer do you have to fight these enemies, no longer do you have to search for the best spots for enemies, no longer do you have to think about the travel distance between you and the nearest inn, or back to the castle so that you can save. No longer do those things really exist anymore. So if the grinding is a core element of the game itself, can it be considered this separate thing that makes you as an individual stronger than other people who have played the game? At this point, it makes it harder for me to distinguish the difference. Well, no, not the difference, but if that is grind, where you have to fight the same enemies over and over again, if that's considered grind, then jumping over a hole over and over and over again of the same width in a Super Mario game, if there was levels which was just like one hole after the other, then you had to jump over all of them and each equal, then why would that not be grinding if it was forced in both games? You see, I think there has to be a level of balance between the risk that you take, the time it takes you to do the grinding, and the rewards that you get. Ideally, what makes a game a strong RPG in my eyes is where there's a lot of grinding that leads to a lot of rewards, and little grinding leads to little rewards, but where it's still possible to fail with lots of grinding and it's still possible to win with very little grinding. There still has to be that level of skill involved, and I think that is what really makes a game with the grind shine. And because of that, the grinding element of that game is a good thing, because it means you have to do this calculation between time and result and measuring one against the other, and I think that is a really good thing to have. I think Dragon Quest 8, jumping through the series here from 1 to 8, I think Dragon Quest 8 does the whole grinding thing brilliantly at the beginning of the game. Because what you are doing is you have to go through a cave at the beginning of the game. It's like your first mission, the first thing you've been sent up to do. But if you fight the boss, if you go for the boss, it's going to be really hard. And you can look around the different places on the area that you are and fight enemies. And you fight the enemies, you take the risk of going far from the church so that you can save. You go back, you find new treasure chests and stuff lying around, you find the new equipment. And then once you've done that enough, you will have enough levels in order to be able to go through the cave. And it's really interesting how it does that. It enforces, the grinding in that game enforces exploration, whereas what we traditionally think of as grinding is just going out and killing one enemy over and over and over again. It doesn't enforce exploration at all. Of course, in Dragon Quest 8 you can literally just step outside of the town and fight enemies, literally like just walking in a circle, but there's no benefit to doing that in comparison to the benefit of exploring the area and finding the chests and finding the different things around on that continent that you're on. So what we are doing is we're taking the simple act of killing enemies over and over again and changing it into something different, where you may be killing the same enemies, but there's gameplay involved in that. You are taking risks, you are constantly analysing things. Now, of course, grinding as itself can still be okay, it doesn't have to be terrible, but there's this added element of this type of grinding. If you didn't have to do any sort of levelling up at all and you could just go straight through to the cave and beat the boss, then it would be best to do that. It would be better, it would be more in your favour as a player to just go straight for it, to progress the story and to progress through to later points in the game. And because it would be so easy just to go through, the whole point of exploring the island gets cut out and you wouldn't feel any real need to do it. So grinding in that sense can be really good. And people always talk about grinding as if it's always this really bad thing. And it isn't, because depending on implementation, a grinding game can be really good. And there are some games that are built around grinding. And of course this goes back to the argument of, if a game is centered around grinding, if you have to do the grinding, can it be considered grinding? But with these types of games, the grinding itself, similar to the beginning of Dragon Quest 8, the grinding itself is the strategy. You are literally measuring up the value of time against certain actions. Not only the time of certain against certain actions, but also the risk involved. And these games are like the Disgaea series, Dynasty Warriors. I think I would kind of include Dissidia in this as well. Earth Defense Force, at least the first one, is very much like this, where it is literally grinding. And especially games like Disgaea, and like that type of series, even though it is, yes, you have to grow thousands of levels in order to be able to beat the strongest bosses, and you have to be able to do all these different things, everything's implemented is so uniquely and so interestingly that the grinding is fun. And if the game didn't have that grind to it, you wouldn't have those interesting mechanics, and the game would ultimately be different and you would be missing out. Of course, games can be brilliant without leveling up or any type of RPG mechanics at all, but when they're done well, the whole idea of grinding and leveling up in itself can just work perfectly. And when you have people that say that leveling up in a game is inherently bad because it's all about time, it's all about playing for longer rather than actually being better, that's not true, because the better players won't play for as long because they'll be able to grind better than other people. And I think that's a brilliant thing. And I know I call this a rant, and I've not really complained about grinding. I've mostly just said it's a good thing, but then I suppose you could say that I am ranting against the people who think grinding's always bad. yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's just you. I don't know if it's just me, or if it's anyone else. But I don't think. I think ranting, as in complaining. Ranting doesn't necessarily have to be complaining about a specific thing. It can be praising something, but still can count as a rant if it's criticising those that criticise the thing that's good, if that makes any sense. Anyway, let me know what you think about what I've just said about how grinding can be good or bad. And I will see you all next time. Actually, before I go, I just want to mention that also another reason grind can be good. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of ways that grind can be good, but one way that grind can be good is that if you really feel like not putting a lot of thought into a game, you can, whilst you're playing it, you can literally choose to grind and do something simple and just enjoy it. You know, that is another example. And I'm sure there's plenty of other examples. Hey, if you got examples, let me know of how grinding can be good. Or how it can be bad even. Because I'm sure there's plenty. But I've just named a few there. Just trying to show you that grinding can be good. Anyway, thanks for listening, and I will see you all next time. For real this time. Goodbye.